Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for this installment of the 2025 Fall Seminar Series presentations hosted by the S&F Center for Hellenic Studies at Simon Fraser University. If you don't know me, my name is Sabrina Higgins, and I am the brand new director for the Center for Hellenic Studies. And thank you. And I will be moderating, but also participating in today's talk. Before we begin, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that this event is taking place at Simon Fraser University on Burnaby Mountain on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Coquitlam peoples. And today I am extra pleased to be presenting our speaker, joining us from Acadia University, Dr. Chelsea Gardner. I'm going to read this, what's on here. I've known Chelsea for 20 years, since 2008, when we were both at UBC, grad students together in the Department of Classics, Religious Studies, and Near Eastern Studies, and have collaborated on many projects since that time, continuing to this day. So she is an associate professor in the Department of History and Classics. She has two fieldwork projects in Greece, the Cartography Project and the Southern Mani Archaeological Project, yep. Like SMAP. What's that mean? And she, as I said last night when she gave her AA talk, is a tour de force in the world of digital humanities. She is the lead on the Women in Antiquity Project and one of the co-founders, along with myself, of Peopling the Past, part of which we're going to be talking about today. So without further ado, I will give you Dr. Gardner.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting. So yes, as Dr. Higgins said, we've known each other for a very long time, and it hurts a little bit to hear that it's 20 years because I don't feel like we're that old, but we are. I spent a lot of time here in Vancouver. My first archaeological excavation was actually on Musqueam land, which was really, really cool, through the Department of Anthropology at University of British Columbia. But I've never been to Simon Fraser. So this is my first time at Simon Fraser University, and I'm super excited to be here. So thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out on this beautiful Friday afternoon. I understand the draw of the sunshine and the outdoors, and I really appreciate that you're choosing to spend your time here. So yeah, Sabrina and I are going to talk today about our work with Peopling the Past, founders of, and I'm going to start by talking about that particular project, give you a little bit of the history and context of how it came to exist. And we're going to tie this into a recent volume that just came out, and Sabrina's going to sort of take the meat of that discussion. And the way that we're going to tie these two things together, I mean, not only is it us who've been working on this for the past 5 years now, but basically through these projects, Sabrina and I and the rest of the Peopling the Past team have really come to value public-facing scholarship and creating research and publications. That is my child in the back too, by the way. If you hear her talking, like she's been warned not to speak out loud, but that's what's going on. I'm the rude one that brought a child. Yeah, so we have really recognized the value of making academic research as accessible to a broader audience. And so that's sort of the theme of what we're going to talk about today, and the driving force behind this research that we've been so lucky to do together for the last 5 years. Okay, so I get to start with Peopling the Past. So this is sort of our mission statement. Peopling the Past is a multimedia digital humanities initiative that produces and hosts free open access resources for teaching and learning about real people in the ancient world and the real people who study them. There's our social media handle across various platforms, our email address if you want to get in touch, and also the social media handle of our logo designer. And Peopling the Past is run by 7 individuals currently. Well, I shouldn't say currently. At its biggest, variously 7 individuals. It started with 6. We've been down to 5, 4 at various times, also depending on parental leave, sabbaticals, commitments elsewhere, archaeological excavations, just life when you had to take a step back. And it's really wonderful because many of us did some form of graduate school together. So I'm sure there are some students in the room, and like you never know where the collaborations and the friendships that you make in graduate school, where they're going to take you. It is really, really fantastic. None of us could have anticipated way back 20 years. Well, it's not full 20 years. 18. It's like, okay, 18, but it's not 20. We're not that old. You just never know. You never know where those are going to take you. And yeah, it's really ridiculous. So we all work in the ancient Mediterranean, North African, and Western Asian worlds. Our group comprises archaeologists, both field archaeologists and material culture specialists, philologists, historians, art historians, and folks who are interested in the digital humanities. So geographically, we all have the same area of interest, but how we apply that varies and is complementary to one another. We have all a very strong commitment to public history. We began the story of peopling the past begins with COVID. So everything shut down in 2020, and those of us who are field archaeologists realized very quickly that we were not going to be engaging in international field work that summer, right? And so that was our immediate concern, like, oh, what are we going to do all summer long, right? Not only that, but as our respective institutions started talking about teaching online in the fall, then we really started thinking, what can we do with this time that we have in the summer in order to create something that would facilitate the transition to online teaching? Like, what can we do collectively? A few of us were interested in public facing scholarship in various different ways, Skype a Scientist, organizations like that. But we didn't know where to turn and how to sort of transform our interest into something that was more tangible. The idea really came to fruition back when Twitter was a thing that people were proud to say that they were a part of. Plastics Twitter really was like a wonderful community of interested and engaged folks. And I posted back in 2020, what if I create podcasts for Greek art and archaeology classes? Would anyone out there use these for teaching if they go online in the fall? And you can see the responses there by Christine Johnson, Megan Daniels, and Carolyn LaFerriere, all founding members of the Peopling the Past project, and all folks who went to UBC in the same cohort all together. So you can see our conversations there. We're like, oh yeah, this is interesting. I was thinking of starting videos, like, let's collaborate on this. And really, it was Christy who sort of came up with the idea that, we should create these resources, sure, to make our lives more easy, to make our lives and the transition to online teaching a little smoother. But this could also be something that we share with everyone. That's not just for us, that we make accessible to anybody who wants them, so that when we go on, we realized it's going to be when we go online in the fall, not if we go online in the fall, people can use these resources regardless of their connections, regardless of the stage in their career, regardless of like the friends that they have. So it's not just the folks that are well-established scholars in the field saying like, hey, if you do a lecture, an online lecture in my class, I'll do one in yours. We can actually create sort of this sense of visiting guest lectures and experts in various areas of the ancient Mediterranean through podcasts. This is just a screenshot of our conversations. This is in Facebook Messenger of how we came to the name. And like, it's so funny how these things happen, right? You're like, okay, sure, people in the past, not knowing that we'd be talking here 5 years later and doing a book launch and all this stuff. And like, yeah, that's just how it happened. We could have been called anything. This is also a problem with SMAP. When I think like Sabrina was introducing the Southern Money Archaeological Project, it's a terrible acronym. And it's okay that this is being recorded. Like, we all acknowledge it's a terrible acronym. Would we have come up with something else if we knew that it was going to become what it did? Yeah, but here we are embracing it. So that's how people in the past really came to be. We have a number of project goals. Ultimately, in addition to what I've just spoken to you about, creating material that everyone can access, so sort of approaching this from an equity point of view, we wanted to also not just be producing videos and blog posts and podcasts about the same kind of material that you can find in almost every undergraduate textbook or any documentary or any popular YouTube channel, namely like big men and wars, right? We weren't interested in that. We wanted to produce content that you couldn't find in the mainstream existing resources that were out there. We wanted to go beyond big history and beyond kings and rulers and important people. So, well, I should say important, but that sounds very judgmental. Beyond the people who are usually the focus of this sort of content. So we wanted to change whose histories we were telling, but also who gets to tell those stories, who has the authority to share their scholarship. And so what we've tried to do through People in the Past is to highlight scholars who are not traditional scholars, folks from equity deserving groups, curators, independent scholars, people who are contingently employed, precariously employed, basically, again, the people who aren't going to get a textbook contract and create the same kind of material. So those were really the goals. Why did we need to do this? Why did we feel so strongly about this? Well, because we are aiming for multivocality in all we do. Multivocality basically just meaning multiple voices, multiple perspectives, right? Our study of the ancient past, and regardless of where that is globally, is enriched when we approach this from multiple perspectives, when we incorporate all kinds of people's voices and opinions. So these are just a few quotes here that we frequently use, and I believe are included in the volume itself, that really we've come back to again and again. And I'll read these just for accessibility purposes. The study of ancient history is, quote, institutional and exclusionary, still the stuff of galleries, museums, and UNESCO World Heritage sites, of prized images, objects, and structures rather than of living humanity, end quote. And then, although archaeologists may not be diverse, the past peoples we study are, quote, therefore we must, quote, create our knowledge in diverse and multivocal communities in order to rigorously understand the human past. These were driving inspirations for us and for the project in general. In everything that we do, we try to keep this in mind and react to these points of view. So I'm saying ancient history here, but of course we're also talking about fields that have traditionally been known as classics or classical studies, which are traditionally very exclusionary in terms of basically any kind of equity deserving group, minority, whether that is racial, gender, etc. You can see here a recent 2017, so it's not actually that recent, Society for Classical Studies survey, the Society for Classical Studies, for those of you who don't know, is the largest professional association of professionals associated with classics. So ancient Mediterranean studies, archaeology, history, language, mythology, architecture, art, etc. 9% of all undergraduate classics majors were minorities. Only 3.5% of tenured full-time classics faculty were minorities. And these are some important, and again, more recent than 2017, articles that are publicly available on, providing us a different perspective and why that is important and why we strive towards multivocality. So Young In Chai, White People Explain Classics to Us, and Javal Coleman, What Is It Like to Be the Only Black Person in Your Department? So again, we're trying to contribute to the existing body of material available to address these problems. Full disclosure, the 6 of us who started People in the Past, and then the 7 of us who were on it at its largest extent, are all white, settler, cishet women. So we are aware of these biases, but there are also issues with women and our representation within academia in general. And so we are also reacting to these very real biases within classics, but the academy as a whole. So these are just some papers, some studies that have come out, most of them particularly about the pandemic and how that affected women, particularly early career women, particularly mothers, people who had disabilities, and really how even though those numbers might have been changing after that 2017 survey, the pandemic hit and really, really set academia back. So, there's a lot to unpack here. How did we get here? How did we get to the point where academia more broadly, but let's just focus on the ancient world studies, classics, ancient Mediterranean studies. How do we get to a field that was dominated by white, cishet male settlers? There are books and books written about this topic. We're not gonna do this fully justice today, but it is worth mentioning that classics as a discipline was founded on the ideals of white supremacy, of the notion of Western exceptionalism, and of patriarchal monotheistic values. And it's important for us to say that out loud and say it often and remind people that it's no accident that this field exists the way that it does. Folks, when classics became an academic discipline and was really the realm of male scholars in Europe, in European cultures, they found themselves very, very interested in the classics for a number of reasons, but used things like the Apollo Belvedere statue that you see on the board here, on the screen here, as more than just a measure of an artistic ideal, but they were actually using these ancient statues, these Greco-Roman statues, as measures of perfection of the human form. And so the Apollo Belvedere was actually used to create the very racist cephalic index, where people were measuring crania for the ideal size of a human head and the ideal structure of a human body. And these were based on ancient Greco-Roman statues. And so really, again, that's a great example just to show like where classics all began and how it is tied to these racist ideas and ideals. This is not a screen here, right? Did this go down? Yep. Okay. Sorry. I forgot I had the clicker and then I was starting to use this. Okay. So we wanted to do something about this. That is ultimately why we are here. So how do we do it? Okay. So all of our media, podcast, and videos showcase a specialist guest. We are the facilitators of the conversation. We are not the experts. We are here to provide a platform for these people to have their say, to tell us about the amazing research that they are doing. The content is aimed at a general audience. So remember, at the very beginning, I was talking about why we existed and going online and creating this material for our introductory classes. That is true. I used the first season of the Peopling the Past podcast in my Greek art and architecture class, and it was wonderful and it was so much fun. But these classes are also aimed at folks who maybe are taking it as an elective, lower level undergraduate class. And so really it's a general audience. You can have people in there that have never engaged with material from the ancient Mediterranean world before. So we ask all of our guests to just talk about this, with an interested, engaged, relatively intelligent audience, but general. We do not assume anything. We supplement all of our content with additional resources. So on the website, you can find readings and media and websites associated with the topic that they were speaking on. And we do strive for accessibility in all of our content. So all of our videos and podcasts, they're naturally open access because they're available and hosted on things like YouTube and Spotify. All of our images that are included and the material itself that we produce is shared under a Creative Commons share-alike license, an open access license. And then all of our materials, our videos and our podcasts include transcripts and captions so that you can download this additional supplementary material from the website itself. And these are just screenshots of some of our popular content, a blog post on serial killers in the ancient world, which is a very, very popular one. Really fun to read, highly recommend. And one of our videos about beer in ancient Egypt. So we're also doing fun topics, right? Like we have a lot of fun with this project. The podcast, I always talk a little bit more about the podcast because I'm one of the co-hosts of the podcast. I'm not going to say too much about it except for just scan the QR code. You can listen to my voice more because I'm almost done talking. But if you haven't had enough, please. So the People in the Past podcast I'll show you sort of a list of the episodes that we've had. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we have themed seasons. So we just finished season 4. And really, the driving force behind incorporating the podcasts themselves into accessible pedagogy was Sabrina and some of the assignments she's been doing here at SFU, which is really cool. So not just producing this content, but teaching people how to analyze it, teaching people how to even create some of this if they want to themselves. And so again, we're trying to not just produce the content, but empower people to do the same thing should they want to. Okay, I'm not going over these. I'm just showing you. Season 1 was Greek art and archaeology. You're probably going to glimpse some. We think our titles are very funny. We think we're very funny. It's important to amuse yourself, right? You can download all of these wherever you get your podcast. So season 1, like I said, was Greek art and archaeology to accompany my class. Season 2 was Roman art and archaeology. And you can also see this is broadly construed, right? We have episodes about Syria. We have episodes about Egypt because, the Roman Empire was large and it wasn't just about Rome. Season 3 was women broadly construed in the ancient Mediterranean, and three of our most popular podcast episodes of all time are from this season. 3 of them, which is very, very cool. And then this one just came out, which was produced by Christine Johnston through some grants at Western Washington University, and it was on cultural heritage and legacies of colonialism. And there are some remarkable episodes in this lineup, and probably because this is the furthest from my area of expertise, this was really like the most eye-opening season for me. There weren't a lot of surprises for me in Greek art and archaeology, but this one was just constant, just shock. So that's what we've done so far in terms of the podcast. We're still producing blogs. We're still producing, in theory, podcasts when we decide on the theme for the next season. But follow along and see what we come up with next. We're really, really proud of this project. Okay, so to wrap up my section of this, I'm going to leave you with 2 more quotes. And this is sort of the transition between the People in the Past project and then the conference and volume that came out of our project and our collaboration. So this is a quote by Bell Hooks from their 2003 volume, Teaching Community: A Pedagogy of Hope. We must learn to use the language that can speak to the heart of the matter in whatever teaching setting we may find ourselves in. When college professors who are democratic educators share knowledge outside the classroom, the work we do dispels the notion that academic workers are out of touch with the world outside the hallowed halls of academe. This is another quote that really is quite meaningful for us and really drives a lot of our decision making, because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are educators, right? All of us work in all of those of us who have been involved in People in the Past since its inception in 2020 we work at academic institutions, we have students, and we teach for a living. But everything we produce here is educational material. So we're teaching even though we don't see our students when we produce this material. We don't see our audiences, right? We just put it out into the world and hope that people are enjoying it and appreciating it and learning something from it. And so this is how we've crossed over from the traditional classroom to a more broader public facing educational experience, let's say. And then last but not least, to end my section, what does it mean to engage in public scholarship? And then the question that we then asked ourselves, which Sabrina will talk about, is how do we do this responsibly? How do we know we're creating content that's not just out there? This is a quote from Catherine Mitchell. The spirit of public scholarship should aim to break down barriers between the academy and the broader public, and when executed, there's that word, responsibly, has the ability to expand inclusion and diversity. So with that, I'm going to leave my section and let Sabrina tell you how we have tried, and I think succeeded, but I am biased, in doing this responsibly. So thank you.
Okay, so it was a long way to go from People in the Past to an edited volume. And the step that sort of got us there was, okay, we're producing this content. And we're trying to ourselves live up to this idea of responsible public scholarship. But we're not doing it in a vacuum. We are constantly being inspired by other practitioners of public scholarship. And so the driving question as we get to the volume, which we're celebrating today, is, you know, how do you actually produce responsible public scholarship? What does that mean? And how can we, as educators who are both inside but also functioning outside of the academy, more effectively produce and contribute to public discourse about the ancient Mediterranean that is inclusive of past diversity, but also inclusive of modern audiences, especially at a time, as many of you know, we're all living in, when classics and its related disciplines are actively and constantly confronting their colonial, their extractive, and their Eurocentric roots. And so thinking about, peopling the past and the people that we're inspired by, these questions were really the driving force behind a conference that we held jointly here at Simon Fraser and also UBC, entitled Presenting the Past, Responsible Public Engagement and Mediterranean History, which was held in March of 2023. So we wanted to address these questions by bringing together a diverse network of knowledge creators and users, all of whom are actively working to break down barriers to diversity and inclusion in traditional ancient Mediterranean scholarship through teaching, research, experiential learning, and public-facing initiatives. And we had 27 participants come to Vancouver from 3 continents, I think. And they presented on a variety of topics related to museums, cultural heritage, digital humanities, and pedagogy. And the colloquium concluded with probably my favorite part, which was this an interview with alt-ac public scholars and a live podcast taping with, if you were here 2 years ago, I think, Let's Talk About Myths, Baby, Live was one of our best attended, I think, seminars, and a lightning round of people who were doing active public-facing scholarship. So the success of that colloquium and the really critical and fruitful discussions that ensued after each of the papers revealed a need amongst all of 27 of us who were in attendance that we needed to have more substantial conversations on responsible public scholarship on topics related to the ancient Mediterranean world, which ultimately led Chelsea and I to kind of take this on behalf of the whole group and produce this co-edited volume, Ancient Past for Modern Audiences, Public Scholarship and the Mediterranean World, which is here, but also fully open access and available online. So today we're celebrating the launch of this book and to think more deeply about the role of public scholarship, the responsibility that we face as public scholars, and the way that public scholarship can engage with our discipline's colonial and extractive past. I want us to think a little bit about what public scholarship is, who's using it, and what are the impacts of it. So when we think of the study of Mediterranean antiquity and its traditional related disciplines, so classics, Egyptology, West Asian studies, classical archaeology, etc., this is no longer the domain of, the elite, rich, white European. It is at our fingertips. It's not in the ivory tower anymore. Now we can access it at any time. So you can see the ancient world through a multitude of both virtual spaces, physical spaces, right? Thinking about museums, archives, data repositories, the plethora of 3D models of ancient sites that exist online, digital humanities projects, online courses, television, social media. I mean, Percy Jackson has got most of my students in this room, right? These days. So, all of this reflects the enormous sort of insatiability of the ancient world. And the desire by various publics, and I mean multitudes of publics, and we'll get to what that means, to consume information related to the ancient world. And the near immediate access that we have to the ancient world has stemmed in large part from the efforts of public scholars. And when I say public scholars, I'm thinking really broadly. I'm thinking academics like Chelsea and I, who deliberately try to put their material online, but also activists, hackers, communities, creators, anyone who is making things available to a public audience. So part of that is eliminating a lot of the barriers that once held classics at a distance, right? You would have to go to Oxford or Cambridge to study the classics. Now, most universities have them, but at the same time, there are still barriers to those access. So let's think about copyright, right? The ability to have this work, but then it's protected. What about, barriers to access? So who's giving you that information? Well, now it's coming from places like Wikipedia, people in the past, Smart History, which Evan worked on. And so by removing these institutional and sort of financial barriers, we're creating accessible avenues, or public scholars are creating accessible avenues to engage with the ancient Mediterranean and dismantling the structural inequities that have historically played a role in gatekeeping our research from the general public. But there's a problem with that. And I think this is a problem that we have to acknowledge. So despite the accessibility of the ancient world to a modern audience, the general perceptions of the cultures and peoples who inhabited the Mediterranean world is still largely shaped by material and popular culture, wherein objects and archaeological remains have pride of place in public consciousness, rather than the people who created and lived with them. And the Parthenon is a great example of that. When we think of Athens, we don't think of the Athenian people. We go straight to the monument. So in this traditional framework, materials are torn from their life worlds and they're disciplined into objects that exist for the gaze of the subject, of the person. And what you get is a civilizational heritage, world heritage of an object. And this is a term I borrow from Lila Valero, who, sidebar, just did our last post for People in the Past. Please check it out. And it's prioritized, so the civilizational heritage, right? The universal value of something is prioritized over its multiple heritages. When I tell my students in Greek archaeology class that the Parthenon, was later a church of the Virgin Mary and also a mosque, most people don't know that. We don't look at the multiple histories of an object, right? So there's this prioritization that has resulted in sort of this overwhelming focus on these great monuments, or as Chelsea would say, the great men, right, who either studied or produced the monuments, obfuscating the multiple histories and experiences of everyday people and objects from the dominant narrative that's constructed about the ancient past. And the disproportionate attention to these kinds of topics, to the great men, to the great objects, has left a lasting impact on the way in which we envision the ancient Mediterranean world and on the perception of proprietorship over the ancient past. And the latter point is especially important. And this is something that Chelsea touched on because it speaks very directly to the narrow demographic of people who have been allowed to study the past, to tell these histories, and those who've been historically excluded from institutions and discourses around ancient history. So to sort of further build on what Chelsea was talking about and to really underscore the whole point of the peopling or of the ancient past for modern audiences volume is that the discipline related to ancient Mediterranean antiquity, broadly construed, remains, according to Mathura Umachandran, one of the most racially homogenous corners of the academy. For example, as Chelsea said, classics has long been dominated by cisgendered white scholars from the global north, whose education bears the legacies of European modernity and its colonial imperative, right? A project that situated the Greco-Roman as the universal or foundational culture for an imagined and socially constructed West. But for decades, scholars, and especially minoritized scholars, have leveled critiques against the Eurocentrism that pervades our field, highlighting really the deeply entangled racist and exclusionary narratives and agendas that emerge when we adopt this civilizational world heritage approach to antiquity. And in doing so, these largely minoritized scholars have carried out the hard work of challenging the narrow and inflexible stereotypes and constraints that have long held our discipline hostage, specifically by confronting the question of who is worthy and what are worthy subjects of inquiry. So while, of course, these criticisms by minoritized scholars are essential to fully understanding the power relations, structures, and avenues of scholarship that have shaped our discipline, as well as the experiences of those who've confronted the status quo, it is not their responsibility to affect change. We can't rely on scholars from underrepresented demographics and minoritized scholars to do this work. So it's a role that we all have to embark on. And that's, as a group of 7 white women, is something that we take very seriously. So if we're going to make a lasting legacy on our discipline, public scholars, right, that is researchers, teachers, content creators, et cetera, need to be at the forefront of this change by acknowledging, to quote Joanna Hannock, that the role that Greek and Roman antiquity have played in constructing, she lists a variety of things here, constructing and authorizing racism, colonialism, nationalism, patriarchy, Western centrism, body normativity, and other entrenched violent social structures. And we need to recognize also how we communicate knowledge to our audience and the perception and how that affects their perception of the ancient past. So in our opinion, and the whole point of this volume was that we need to recognize that to be a responsible public scholar, you have to engage in decolonial and anti-racist work, which must consist of us deploying our platforms to critique structures of power and to take reparative action with regard to epistemic injustice. So we have a responsibility as public scholars not only to interrogate the colonial and exclusionary history of our discipline, but to engage in teaching and public-facing scholarship in ways that center multiple voices and histories, and actively working towards the creation of a more equitable and just presentation of our field. So in our view, responsible scholarship is reflected in the contributions of this volume that challenge the traditional hierarchical narratives within the academy and invite a broader demographic in the participation of knowledge construction. So if we're going to frame public scholarship as a place that needs to engage in responsible public scholarship, we need to think of it almost as operating as a form of social justice. And that's something we take very seriously at People in the Past, especially. We need to break down barriers within the academy, but also outside of it, in order to maximize equity, diversity, and other social benefits. So the tearing down of these sort of long withstanding metaphorical walls also is an important step in recognizing that we can no longer gatekeep the information to which we are privy to, especially from the communities that we claim to serve. A lot of us work in the Mediterranean and arrive in the Mediterranean not speaking the language, right? If you were here for Heba Abgawald's talk, she had a really powerful talk on, excluding Egyptians from their own heritage, and that has been happening for hundreds of years. So we also then need to confront the reality that even the most well-intentioned, altruistic practitioners of public scholarship are also very much deeply embedded in a neoliberal framework that rewards itself on our participation in these things. Do we get tenure from these projects? Do we get publications out of these projects that contribute to our academic standing? So we have to acknowledge our privilege, we have to recognize it, but also use our platforms for good. Okay, so now we can get into the book. Now that we have the framework for why we're doing the book, what do we actually talk about inside of this book? So, Ancient Tasks for Modern Audiences promotes the creation of inclusive methods of knowledge mobilization and communication in public spheres across three main areas: museums, teaching and learning, and global and local projects. And these are very much interrelated. Many of these categories, or the chapters in each of these categories, could have belonged in any other chapter. So they require close collaboration and close conversation across social sciences and humanities and beyond academic institutions in order to enact responsible change. And these are three particular areas that we have noted really benefited from the Eurocentric structures that have claimed ownership of the Mediterranean. So it was important for us to address these directly. And each of the contributions tackles pressing challenges faced within the various inextricably linked fields and offers ways that we can move forward. And so one of the things we really wanted to do with this volume was to have something practical, a call to action in many ways of how we can move forward, how we can address the exclusionary narratives that plague our field, and how we can change the way that knowledge is generated and communicated. Okay, like Chelsea, I am not going to go through each and every one of these chapters. This is just to give you a sense of who was contributing to the volume and the kinds of material that appear therein. The first section of the volume deals with museums. And we have to start here, I think, because museums are perhaps one of the most recognizable ways in which the Mediterranean has been subjected to colonial extraction for several centuries, with the result that not only cultural artifacts, but of course, human remains are currently dispersed across museums around the world and far away from the places from which they originated. Now, regardless of whether these transplanted people and their objects are on display within storerooms, their displacement raises countless ethical dilemmas. Museums themselves are rooted in imperialist ideologies of ownership and exclusion, decentering the real people behind these prized acquisitions that they have, and the modern stakeholders to whom they belong. So, while advances are, of course, being made with regard to education and communities, the operating models and philosophies of museums tend towards this idea of a shared cultural heritage, but are still often very much intertwined with legacies of colonialism and exploitation. So I just want to kind of highlight a couple of my favorite chapters from this one. The first one is Anisa's. She recognized in her work that Egypt is often given center stage when it comes to discussions of this sort of North Africa, and that anything from, especially the Sudan, which is where her research is largely located, but also the surrounding regions, is completely separated from Egypt, as if there were no cultural contact, as if Sudan did not continue just past Egypt down the Nile, right? So that collections here are often in the African object section, even ancient objects, completely separated from the contemporary Egyptian materials with which they're in dialogue. Heba, who we're very familiar with here at SFU, she gave a really powerful chapter on the idea of rematriation, listening to the indigenous peoples to whom this material belongs, and giving Egyptian voices, or Egyptian people, a voice in how their heritage is controlled. And also Ashton Rogers, I'd like to call out as well, from University of Michigan. She's a graduate student who really wants to push forward as someone who is Indigenous herself in looking at the ways in which we can use objects, and in her case, it was a mummy that they have on display, mummified human remains, and trace the really colonial narratives that accompany the extraction of that material, and the ways in which that actually affected a local Indigenous community in Michigan. For teaching and learning projects, you know, this occurs in institutions every day worldwide, from primary classrooms to post-secondary lectures to online fora. And it holds the promise of responsible and socially transformative learning if done correctly, right, in relation to the Mediterranean. And so this is perhaps our most diverse section in terms of who was invited to participate. Most of what you're seeing here are undergraduate and graduate students. Chapter number 3 was co-written by undergraduate students at the University of Winnipeg, and 4 and 5 co-written with graduate students. So really allowing the students who are engaging these projects with their professors to have a say in how they want to present their research on the ancient world. One of the really interesting ones to me was teaching the ancient world with reproductions, and our colleague Christy at Western Washington 3D prints objects to have in her classroom, and uses this as a way to critique museums. How do objects make their way into museums? Do we really need objects when we can 3D print things? Using them as conversations to talk about looting, to talk about accessibility, right? If you can't see an object and you can't exist in a museum, let's say because you have a visual impairment, how does that space feel for you? So a 3D replica allows you to engage in a more accessible way. And of course, peopling the past, but you heard about that, so we're not going to deal with that one. And then the final section is entitled Global and Local Projects. And this is where we get into really the digital humanities. And this is a way where we, as public scholars who are in the online space, can contribute to stopping, curbing some of the misinformation that is spread online, and co-opted for modern purposes. And most conspicuously, and especially lately, this idea of these white-centered ideas of a Western heritage originating in Greece and Rome, which have bolstered a lot of political movements of late. I don't know if you, especially my undergraduate students in the room, have noticed the co-option of slogans like Molan Labe, right? Come and get them from Sparta by white nationalist groups. Or the people who stormed the Capitol wearing Roman armor. So there's this sort of co-option that has taken place. And so a lot of these projects are ways to contribute to more responsible knowledge production around the ancient Mediterranean without fetishizing it, right? And without giving romanticized presentations of the ancient world either. And all of these are doing a lot of different things. I'll highlight Chelsea's and Vicky's project on wiki education, where they went and became wiki scholars, which means that in their classrooms, they are actively, with their students, contributing and editing Wikipedia pages to make them more inclusive, to make them more realistic to the ancient world, to correct some of the biases that may have made their way in, but also to give space to topics that haven't been studied. I mean, was it you or Vicky who did women? It was your class, right?
We both have done it, but she's the one who, it was her class that did the Boudica page.
Yes, right. So updating pages of ancient women on Wikipedia. Much of that has been done by Chelsea and Vicky, which is really exciting. Updating those pages and creating new pages related to women in antiquity. This one here by our colleague Francesco on Cyprus, they're creating not only an app for locals to understand their own heritage by geotagging these buildings, but they're also taking locals in the community with Parkinson's disease out into the spaces, providing an accessible experience for people in that community. So it's a public-facing sort of project of care as well. So we can see the various ways that we're all trying to contribute to making digital humanities and cultural heritage a more the word I'm a kind place, accessible place, but also challenging the stereotypes and the problems within our own projects as well. So ultimately, the goal for this book is to produce, support, showcase diverse and inclusive public scholarship. So by drawing heavily on the work of scholars and professionals traditionally excluded from discourse and public scholarship, the chapters in this volume seek to push research contributions beyond the traditional academic boundaries, produce a series of best practices translatable to various audiences, to address the exclusionary past of the Mediterranean, and to give general resources to people who are working in this field. And one of two things that I really want to highlight before I end is that from the beginning, this was unquestionable that this was going to be an open access volume. If we are not going to, or if we're going to critique people gatekeeping, we were going to come up with the money, and it was a lot of money. Thank you to all the contributors to make this gold open access, which meant that the day it was published in book form, it also went live completely free online. The other thing that we wanted to do was to ensure that people who were not traditionally represented in these kinds of volumes, on public scholarship, were included. If you have a volume on public scholarship, it's going to be from the big hitters in the ancient world. And it's not going to be a volume like this at all. What we wanted to do was we wanted to have as few tenured folk as possible. And in the end, by the time the volume was published, there were 37 contributors and 6 of us had tenure. And that was very important. And the other thing, and I'll end with the conversation Chelsea and I had with our author, was we wanted to put women in the forefront. And one of the critiques from someone who was reviewing our book said, there's a lot of women here. It's a little imbalanced. To which our editor responded, good. We should push it the other way. So from start to finish, we had a really great experience bringing, all of the work of these authors to light, promoting people who wouldn't traditionally have the chance to participate in this kind of work, and skewing for the better the gender publication in this book. So I will end there. Thank you to everyone who contributed. And if you want, you can just go get it right there. Anyone have questions? Dimitri.
Another question, I think that all this is very important on so many different ways, but I want to stick with the institutional way in which this matters. Work like this is not going to be possible if the universities that employ the scholars who are going to participate in it and are going to open the gates from the gatekeeping to bring others in, do not have the policies at departmental level to accept and recognize this kind of scholars.
Yes.
And in that sense, kudos to Global Humanities and this. It is important because breaking barriers includes co-opting institutions and changing institutions, right? So this is great. And at the same time, kind of the comment, but also here maybe there is a question is, what was your experience of the editorial process and the review process for the volume? Because this is a process where you were taking something perhaps out of the ordinary and submitting it to peer review, which comes with its own kind of processes. So
I'm going to start and then
you can start. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So we had a good number of participants from the colloquium who we were drawing on to be contributors to the volume. We had the proposal reviewed. And so that went to triple blind
Triple
peer,
blind, yeah.
peer review. That's where we had they actually all three reviewers waived anonymity, which was
Yeah.
really cool, so we could see who they were. Yeah, even the one who said
Too many.
there's not enough men here. I'll let you guess the gender of that individual. It's fine. We did that, and then we were off to the races. We did the standard thing that you do with edited volumes, which is we contacted our contributors. We asked them for a draft. We sort of edited and gave them feedback individually. Then we switched and did it again because so many of our contributors were early career or students or independent scholars, content creators, and had never done this kind of thing before. So we were very conscious that we're bringing them into this world, this very scary, dangerous world of academic publishing. We don't want to just sort of like push them off the cliff and say, and then like let the dogs attack when it's time for reviews to come out. And so we did a couple rounds of that. Then we did, based on my experience with a different open access series, the Making Humanities Matter series, we did internal peer review. So every chapter was shared with another one of the contributors within their sections to give feedback, to share resources, and that sort of thing. We then decided that we would send the entire volume for peer review. So this was not necessary and not requested and not required, but because we felt so much was riding on this for these scholars, many of whom we contacted the editor and we said, we'd like this to go out. Different reviewers. We got two reviewers.
Three in the end.
Three in the end?
Yeah.
Okay. But they found separate reviewers for each of the sections. Yeah. So we said, here's a list of potential people that you could contact for museums. Here's a list of potential people you could contact for global and local, so that they're really getting like concentrated feedback from experts in those areas. We did that. We did another round of edits, and then that is essentially the process. But we did all of this from start to finish in under a year. Right?
Well, the colloquium was in March 2023.
Yeah.
We solicited, I think, in January.
Yeah, we got that second round of feedback within a year. We moved fast. I was on sabbatical.
Yeah. And then I had sabbatical, so
yeah,
it worked very well.
Yeah. The publication of the volume wasn't under a year, but it was
2 years.
Less than 2 years.
The date of the colloquium.
Yeah. So the other thing, and you can talk to this a little bit, was the need to find additional contributors based on the reviews, and some people having to step back. So if you want to talk about that.
So when we got our first round of feedback from the publishers, there was a comment that we needed to have something else on indigenization. So we had Heba's chapter, but they felt that was very specific to Egypt. But if we're going to look at decolonial practices within the context, largely of North American institutions, we needed to have someone working on indigenization. And so we put out a call for papers for that. And that's
how we got three of the museum chapters from there, which was incredible. Yeah.
And we took all three because I mean, Ashton's was really interesting because she was looking at how the Kelsey Museum is dealing with that mummy.
Francis
with
Santiago.
She was looking at copies, how copies are being used, Roman copies in museums, and then Kendall to create an indigenizing her syllabus forward, because she young scholars is that, especially when it's open access, they don't want to give all of their information away. They want to have something to go to a university with. So she couldn't give her syllabus. So she gave ideas from her syllabus for decolonizing the classics, and she turned that into a chapter. So, and that another challenge I think Kelly touched on, but when you're dealing with students and graduate students and early career scholars who really this is their first or among their first publications, I think that's where the largest amount of our workload came in, was like really treating that with a lot of care, because we didn't want to send them out into the world with something that could be so heavily critiqued. So we did so many rounds of internal editing and peer review to ensure that everyone, had something that was top tier to come out as their first publication.
We also had, so following the colloquium, there were a couple folks who said, like, thanks, I just can't take this on right now. I can't be a part of it. So Catherine Louin was another one of the indigenizing chapters. But there were, throughout the process, and this was where we sort of wrestled because we try to strive for accessibility. We try to strive away from the Eurocentric practices of a neoliberal and deadlines. This is the way that this has to go. Like, let's produce. We're struggling with this, but at the same time, we're conscious that we're asking these young scholars to give us something, and it's important for their careers that this come out in a timely manner. Like, it just is. And so we're really struggling with this because we're like, so some of these early career scholars and graduate students are giving us their material within the deadlines. Great. Others aren't. So we have to make this choice. Do we lean into pushing back against deadlines and the institution and the way in which publishing is traditionally done? Or do we say, unfortunately, this is the world we live in, and this is an academic publication, and most of these people want jobs, so we're going to be hard about these deadlines so that this actually can come out. I mean, if anybody's had any experience with edited volumes, under is remarkable. Under 2 years to publish, heard of, but this was so important to us because it's not helpful for a graduate student to say, like, this is in production. They want to have it in publication. But this meant that we actually had to say to some of our contributors, like, this doesn't seem to be working for you. Like, do you want to step back? And like, everyone is in our acknowledgements who is ever a part of the colloquium or who was an author and had to step back. But yeah, unfortunately, we had to like have them make those decisions, which could not have been easy. We showed a picture of Kyle Jordan, and he was one of the original. He just had too much on his plate. It would have been wonderful. He works on disability and access in museums. He himself is a museum professional and student and disabled person. We really wanted his perspective, but he just had too much with the timeline. And so we struggled with that a little bit, but ultimately I think it was beneficial so that we could actually get it out. Yeah. So that was a really long answer to that.
First of all, it was really wonderful, super
Thank
fascinating
you.
talk. I'm curious as to how the two of you approach people in the public, like students or just people you talk to whose only exposure to classics has been through popular culture. How do you like deal with the inaccuracies and the ideologies that can often bring to the table without putting people down?
I can start.
Yeah, that's really best.
I will say with genuine curiosity. So for me, the way that students come in my room is through popular culture. I mean, I literally owe my job now to Percy Jackson when I was teaching my PhD student as a PhD student, and I'm very much dating myself, to Indiana Jones.
Harry Potter,
or something in that world. And so if that's the only exposure you have, I mean, it's interesting in that sense, but you're coming at it from a point of curiosity. So I like to always ask my students, like, what brought you in this room? On very few occasions have I ever had someone who came at it from a more sort of right-wing ultra-nationalist perspective. And I think in those cases, it's again approaching it with curiosity. Why do you think that way? What has informed your decision? And then you're not going to change that person's mind overnight. It is, let's just talk about the ancient world and how it actually existed, and let me show you the sources from the past and the, these objects that we're talking about and how people interacted with them. And you just have to present it factually and hope that in the end they have a more nuanced version of the ancient world.
I don't know what my answer is. I've really struggled with this. I really I am a very emotional and volatile human, and that's fine. That's who I am. But when of course, the Percy Jackson thing, it's wonderful. Yeah. I don't care how you came to this. If you love it and you're interested in learning, great. And then I will show them the Eidolon article called The Whitening Thief and how Percy Jackson is riddled with Western exceptionalism. And then we'll talk about what Rick Riordan did afterwards and how this is a better trajectory than other authors of popular series that bring people to classics. Anyway, that's the easy stuff, right? And when you're in a university classroom, it's mostly easy. But yeah, then there's the times where it's like, what about this Graham Hancock? Is that his name? Is that his name? Yeah. Thing that I saw on Netflix. Or like, what about ancient aliens? And like, and seriously, like that happens a lot more than I care to admit. I'm also, my university is in Nova Scotia. And like, I don't even care that it's being recorded. I have colleagues at my institution who are not archaeologists, but who have appeared on the show Oak Island.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so like this is my reality, and people, and it's really, really difficult, like on a daily basis. And Oak Island, like don't Google it, don't give them any more, like they don't need any more buzz marketing, like it's them anyway. But like people in Nova Scotia, yeah, it's looting, it's sorry, not looting, it's treasure hunting, and it's so much that's wrong with pop culture and sensationalized archaeology, in that it is, like ancient aliens, inherently racist, right? The whole idea behind Ancient Aliens or shows like Oak Island or anything that Graham Hancock does is that there's got to be a better explanation for this than people who aren't white. Like that's it. The Egyptians couldn't have built the pyramids because they're not white. So it had to be aliens. Or like truly on Oak Island, there's got to be something interesting here because like nothing interesting happened in indigenous Nova Scotia ever. So like surely we have to have like some treasure hidden by the Knights Templar. That's the only interesting thing that could possibly ever come out of archaeology in Nova Scotia. And it's sinister and it's really, really depressing. And, you know, I've had these conversations with everybody who's a professional archaeologist has had these conversations. And it does depend. I don't know the answer to how you deal with this when people are not in their mind. Yeah, whether that's, you know, Oak Island is cool or it's build the pyramids. And the only thing that I can think of, and this is sort of like a deflect and distract strategy, is like thinking of cool things I know and stories that I tell in my classes and being like, forget it. Like, let me tell you an actual story that doesn't have conspiracy theories associated with it, that is just like a really awesome thing that actual ancient humans did. Like, isn't that the cool thing, that humans have been around for this long and we've done really cool stuff? That's way more interesting than attributing it to like aliens or like some people, you know, anyway, conspiracy theories and all of this. So, but ultimately I don't know. And I don't think I've succeeded in changing many people's minds because I tend to heels in the ground and be like, I'm right. I'm pretty sure I've read more social media posts about this than you, ma'am. So anyway, it's tough, but we do what we can. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
But there is like so talking about like Percy Jackson and things like that, like the content that there's available is like unreal. Like that kid back there like listens to the Greek cast from National Geographic, and it's amazing. Like, and it is called Greeking Out, but every once in a while they're like, this is usually about ancient Greek mythology, but let me tell you about Chinese mythology. Let me tell you about like indigenous African stories, and and it's like, yeah, the content that's available now, if you know where to look, is actually awesome. There's really good stuff out there. Yeah.
Evan.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up with a question about content because obviously the internet has sort of democratized so much, and anyone, there's no gatekeeping. Maybe there should be.
Yeah.
You don't have to get peer reviewed posts.
Yeah.
You know, or with creative or whatever. So it's different as scholars to be putting stuff out there. Certainly publishing in a journal that had a reputation, and, you know, so you're competing with all this kind of other stuff. Some of it's obviously wrong, intentionally, unintentional, and some of it's deeply problematic. So how do you, like, is there a need to try to distinguish public scholarship in these spaces to try to signal while also not gatekeeping? You get what I'm saying? That there's this kind of tension where we want to make it accessible to the public, but perhaps to guide people who are serving the web to your, you know, to kind of responsible scholarship instead of you know, the videos in the manosphere about, you know, that
Right.
sort of thing. How do you deal with that?
You want me to go? You want to
Yeah,
go?
start.
Again, I don't know. Yeah, this is becoming like increasingly problematic also with the increased prevalence of AI, right? And like the AI generated blurbs that come up when you're doing like a Google search about anything, and where they're drawing content from, because you're exactly right. Like AI is not peer reviewing the content to see what is legitimate and what's coming out and what they're summarizing for people. And so, yeah, it's funny. I did author the chapter on Wikipedia, and I have always been like pretty pro Wikipedia. And I never thought that AI would be the thing that like turns me even more pro Wikipedia, but I really is like this is nobody thinks of Wikipedia as an academic source in and of itself, but things like that, things that actually have citations, right? And the sources from which the information is derived from are becoming increasingly important, right? Whether that's in a classroom context and you're teaching your students how to find information, right? And using Wikipedia, even as a starting point to go to an actual book or publication in a journal or, you know, digital resource. But because AI is going to draw more and more and more from those kinds of publicly accessible resources, and you know, even in the last year, seeing more and more, and especially now, the AI blurbs showing like where those blurbs are from. And like again, I never thought that like parentheses Wikipedia would be like, oh yay, like what a good thing, because we tell our students like, no, you can't cite Wikipedia, right? You can go to it to find sources that you then cite. But now I'm like, oh good, okay, they're drawing from a Wikipedia page because at least the Wikipedia pages are vetted, because so much out there isn't. And like your question is so important, but it's so much bigger than this topic. It's for everything, right? And like just the like our grasp on reality and what is fact and is just becoming looser and looser and looser. So this is just going to be an increasing problem in how anybody tests whether what they're reading is true or not. And that's fundamentally terrifying to think about, right? Like what is any of this information?
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we're doing with people in the past and have done from the beginning always is to sort of signal to someone coming to our page that it's a legitimate source and, you know, internally peer reviewed. Everything has a bibliography accompanied by it, right? And so I think that as we move forward in this space and we're trying to create responsible public scholarship, that is going to be sort of a bare minimum. I think it'll also potentially require us to start stating on our website too, like this material has been internally peer reviewed or, you know, things like that. Speaking of AI, I don't know how I feel about it. Maybe it's for the best, but I run the website for people in the past, and I can see every time ChatGPT cites us or draws from us. And so I'm seeing it more and more now that ChatGPT is actually coming to people in the past to source things. But yeah, I don't.
Yeah. But we want that. We want it sort of
at first. And
you're
then,
right. You're right.
And then now I think it's probably.
But now when you were realizing what's happening, I think it is.
It is.
I think it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, that reminds me, most podcasts you listen to, and even the people who are listening to people in the past, like 99% of the time, you're not going to go like, oh, I heard this on a podcast. I better go to their landing page on their website and see what this is. Like we all did. I mean, I just said a fact, 99%. Like that's not, I'm just making this up. This is just how people speak. Unfortunately, now people are living their lives with podcasts in their ears all the time and, you know, regurgitating that information as if it is cited peer-reviewed fact, and that it gets really, really scary. I was one of the episodes that will eventually one day come out was a roundtable conversation we had with a bunch of podcasters in the classics and related disciplines around Canada. This was at a conference, and one of the panelists spoke about this statistic that floats around the web, that something like 3% of podcasts make it past their 5th episode, and like 1% of podcasts make it past season 1, right? And I cited this episode in a chapter I have coming out on podcasting. I cited her saying that, but then when I tried to find the location of that, she was right. This comes up everywhere, but you can't actually find an original And like, it was podcast upon podcast upon podcast with no actual statistic or citation. And like, I'm trying to download metrics from Spotify, from Apple Podcasts, from Google Podcasts to find out, like, can we do this? I'm surely this is statistics. Can we figure out how many podcasts are created and what percentage of those? And like, this just, it didn't exist. And like, that's, so even we're falling prey to this all the time, right? And it's a good reminder to be hyper aware and be vigilant, because it's just so easy to fall into. Yeah. So it's another, I don't know.
John?
Yeah, thanks so much. This was great. Lots of great stuff. I'm wondering what might be coming next. I mean, you've got one book here. Are we seeing maybe the theory of press creating a journal where the sort of
Oh my God.
We take on that extra.
I'm the president of my faculty union right now, so like, I can't do much. And I'm pretty sure you just took on the director of this. Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know. What are we going to do next?
I think
Right now we're just trying to survive.
we're on maintenance mode, I think,
Yeah.
is what is happening, is keeping the People in the Past project alive. You know, we're all at this. I mean, it's great because we all started this project when we were untenured, very junior faculty. Some people were postdocs, like very junior. And then now we're all in this transitionary phase where we're taking on additional admin roles or going up for tenure. So year 5 is sort of this limbo year almost for all of us, because we're all sort of at these transitionary points in our lives. So we're on basically maintenance. Let's keep the ball rolling with People in the Past.
But it's also like a dance between, okay, we don't want to be those stereotypical scholars that are like, great, we got tenure, so like, see ya. Like, we did what we needed to do and got the publication. So like, okay, but also not be those people that are like inserting ourselves into the narrative. And like, so I think we really are at a point where we need to reevaluate and really make sure that we're using our now increasingly privileged platform to do something. And like, that is interesting that I hadn't thought of like a journal. We'll bring it back to the group. We'll talk about it. One of the things that we are generally talking about, and this is like very much a work in progress, is so the podcast co-host for seasons 2, 3, and 4, Melissa Funky, she's at the University of Winnipeg, and her and we're both at primarily undergraduate institutions, so neither of us have graduate students, and her and I are exploring the idea for a co-taught class in which we record an entire season of a podcast within a semester, and our undergraduate students are learning how to produce the podcast themselves, and hopefully applying for some grants to like get people back and forth between Winnipeg and Wolfville, and really do this collaborative public humanities project where the students play a role in getting a season of the podcast out, which would be super cool. It'd be a really, really good opportunity for the students, but it also solves a perennial problem that we have, which is editing a podcast takes so much time. Like, it just, all of this takes so much time, and there is only a finite number of hours in the day.
Yeah.
So that's what we're exploring right now in terms of like getting more content out. But yeah,
I mean, like,
what else?
When opportunities arise, like we've applied for grants. We applied actually with Costa for a National Geographic and a Nat Geo Explorer grant, which was unsuccessful, unfortunately. So, you know, there are like ideas ruminating back on something with Princeton, the museum thing, which is on pause, but
hopefully we have some museum professionals who are affiliated with the project or who have been at various times. And, you know, one of the other struggles, if I'll be honest right now, is the fact that we are a group that is internationally stationed currently. So some of us have jobs in Canada, but not all of us have jobs in Canada. And, you know, international travel to the States has implications now, and like collaborations with university faculty in the States has implications now. And so that's also a reason why we're in maintenance mode, because like we're just kind of to see what happens and like whether we're going to be able to continue this level of collaboration with our colleagues who happen to be located in the States. Yeah.
So for now, just producing more content for the blog, especially right now, because the podcast season just finished.
Yeah.
So lots of blog posts coming out. But
yeah. Yeah. Oh. That's cool. All right.
You pointed out that there are institutions that do not have graduate programs that do a lot with undergraduates, and my sense is that given shrinking resources for graduate studies in the classics world in Canada, I think that might end up being the future.
Mhm.
Right? If you cannot run a robot, I mean, if, in all honesty, you perhaps shouldn't be running a graduate program that is churning students who do not have an end
Mhm.
professionally. Can we reach teaching at the undergraduate level by going into that kind of dissemination and then having a much more grassroots impact to wider audiences? I mean, Sabrina knows that because we are theoretically a research center, but have always been outward facing, this idea of beginning to direct more resources towards undergraduates is something that we're really trying to suss out, sort out.
Yeah.
Because it might be more productive.
Yeah, we'll see. That's the hope, and that's sort of making lemons out of lemonade situation when you are a researcher who doesn't have graduate students, right, at a primarily undergraduate institution. The other piece to this puzzle is the constant negotiating of provincial governments and what they're deciding to fund, and whether your entire university is at risk because I don't know, in a province with a conservative ultra majority, they're making every single program justify their existence. And spoiler alert, it's not because they're worried about education and kinesiology and business. It's because they don't understand that critical thinking and the arts are important in getting all kinds of jobs, but they just see this as like human enters university. What is job? What is the job from there? And so when we're allowed to teach the way that we know how to, and to like enrich this undergraduate education with these kinds of experiences, our students flourish, these projects flourish, public scholarship flourishes, and we are able to produce all of this spectacular content. But that's when we're allowed to do that, when the governments don't interfere with the way that we are teaching and offering degree granting programs. So that's my current and mounting fear about what undergraduate education will look like. But right now, I agree with you. Like, this is super important. And undergraduate education is this really like untapped resource, I think, for doing really, really, really spectacular stuff.
Well, I think Melissa's project, the Lux project, is a shining example of that. I mean, she has a group of students who every Friday after school, like after classes are done at 5 o'clock, come to their lab to work on the heathering collection they have in their museum. They photograph it, they study it, they take it to local communities like seniors' homes or local events put on by the Egyptian community or elementary schools, and they've created this really unique experience for those classics undergraduate students to get not only practical experience, but to engage in undergraduate research that eventually gets published. So I think there are, when allowed, really interesting opportunities for that kind of work. Okay. Well, we need to go to the pub. So,
yes.
So,
That's great.
Let me just conclude to the important things. So thank you all for attending, and thank you to Chelsea for giving a very great talk. Our schedule for the fall semester is now available on our website, sfu.ca/Hellenic Studies, and we look forward to welcoming our next speaker on Friday, October 17th, Dr. Alex Tupé from University of Montreal. And don't forget, of course, that on Friday, October 3rd at 7 p.m., we'll present Capella Romana and the Lost Voices of Hagia Sophia in coordination with Gefira, the SFU-UCLA partnership, and the Hellenic Canadian Congress of BC, and information can also be found on our website. So thank you again.